Hey, it's Sol with another video, brought to you by Andrew and Mark. If you were affected by the great stabby of Azeroth and are suffering from heart or breathing conditions, call Andrew and Mark. You may be entitled to compensation. Soon, players around the world will participate in the Battle for Azeroth, Blizzard's next expansion for the world of Warcraft. Hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but by the time we get past the introduction, we'll have played through some of the most significant events in World of Warcraft's history, the destruction of faction cities. Darnassus, the city atop the World Tree Teldrassil, and the Undercity, the remnants of Lordaeron, will fall. So, where will these displaced people go? We'll examine a few of my favorite possibilities, but first, let me bore you with the ideas behind designing this massive shift in the story of WoW. Removing an entire capital city from the existing story is a first for the World of Warcraft, and players are about to lose one per faction. In the past, we gained a sort of capital for the gnomes and the trolls who previously had none. Meanwhile, goblins got a capital that very few care to visit, and the worgen got a capital that was used for a questline and hasn't been used since. But now the giant tree and the undead cauldron will be more or less a smoldering crater for characters in the Battle for Azeroth storyline, and you know what? It might stay like this. We do know that the original Undercity and Darnassus will remain intact until you play through Biffa so as to not disturb the lower level experience. When thinking of where to relocate a capital, it's not just about moving the location, but its people too. Not everyone is as attached to certain NPC names, but they're still going to be respected. It wouldn't be fair to have some of them simply disappear unless they were casualties of their respective battles. Resource-wise, it might be too much trouble to develop a new capital. And neither the Night Elves nor the Forsaken may find a new settlement at all. There's a good chance they'll be scattered to the wind, left to be refugees in the remaining capitals, or they'll, all be pirates raiding the seas, or Nomi will sacrifice them all. It just depends on the narrative that's written. On the possible reactions by these races, the Night Elves are formidable, but they were never at the forefront of alliance politics or military command, maybe because they're sexist. I know, that was way too easy. The Forsaken were also very much about themselves, but at present, Sylvanas Windrunner, their leader, has become the CEO of the Horde. It'd be a tough pill to swallow if the Night Elves and the Forsaken just went scurrying into the darkness for their survival, never to be heard from again, save for a few grumbles and murmurs. With Sylvanas at the helm, I have a feeling that the Forsaken as a race will still make a big presence wherever they settle. The Night Elves I'm a little bit less sure about, but I'm excited to get into a bit of speculating. Keep in mind these two things. I'm not going to take the continents from previous expansions with any consideration except for the Broken Isles. It doesn't quite feel right for a small section of, say, Outland to be updated for the Battle for Azeroth when the rest of it hasn't been touched in years. On the other hand, the events leading up to the expansion involve the Broken Isles, so there isn't a big disconnect there. Maybe I should have said this at the beginning, but this video is pure speculation and tinfoil based on really loose assumptions, so let's just try to have fun here, okay? Let's get ourselves started with the Night Elves. The Night Elves know a little bit about what it's like to lose things. They were there during the Sundering, after all. When it comes to relocating, there are in fact numerous places they could stay thanks to their sort of affinity for life and nature, which is the total opposite of the undead Forsaken. Even neutral territories like the Jade Forest could house a possible settlement, but again I'm being stubborn and limiting my guesswork to the two original continents and the Broken Isles. There are a handful of places the Night Elves could run, but we have to keep in mind the impression that Battle for Azeroth presents, that for the most part the Horde control Kalimdor and the Alliance control the Eastern Kingdoms. In Kalimdor there is a single holdout that prevents full Horde domination of that continent, and those are the islands that are home to the Draenei and the ruins of the Exodar. This is a likely spot given its proximity. Consider the movement of an entire displaced people. Mage portals are handy enough to allow the Night Elves or any group of refugees to migrate anywhere, but the Exodar is the one place that makes sense for practical travel. It's an island, so it's easy to see any large force incoming well in advance. The Exodar is underground, which makes it physically defensible, but vulnerable to a prolonged siege or a chemical attack, which the Horde is definitely capable of. But if the Exodar isn't an option, then there are a few locations the Night Elves could migrate to over on the Eastern Kingdoms. Personally, I can see them migrating to Gilneas. Under the assumption that the Alliance have control over the continent, it would make sense that the Gilnean seat of power is restored. The Night Elves were a sanctuary to the Gilneans in their time of need. Why shouldn't Gen Greymane extend the same courtesy, right? The Night Elves could stay in Gilneas proper, or they could occupy Silverpine Forest. In the long term, they could also help to work on restoring Tirisfal Glades and Lordaeron itself to restore that kingdom too, but that would be a ways off. There's even the wetlands further to the south, if they're able to restore Menethil Harbor to fighting strength, and then some. Menethil can be much grander than it was before. It can be a strategic go-between for Stormwind's and Gilneas' port. If there was a place for the Night Elves in the Broken Isles though, without question it would be somewhere in Val'sharah. The entire zone screams Night Elf, and they already have a strong presence there, unlike in Azuna, which is populated by their more ethereal counterparts. When you consider it, Val'sharah is kind of split into two unequal parts, that which is protected by the Druids, and the other watched by the Sentinels and the Priestesshood. This makes Blackrock Hold an ideal candidate. It's a place just waiting to be retaken with nearby Bradensbrook as a staging point and an additional port. And there are more ideas I'm sure, but these rank among my favorites. What about the Forsaken though? They don't have a reputation for being good house guests, opting to convert their living environment into something more hospitable for them, which isn't usually compatible with certain things like life. Just like the Night Elves possibly running to the Draenei, by proximity, the Forsaken can make their way to neighboring Silvermoon City. I think this is ideal. It's even got pre-ruined buildings for them to make use of, just next door. They can also occupy the Ghostlands to the south and make use of the Lingering Scourge there for their fun experiments. Here's a side thought, a bit more tinfoil for you to wear. With the undead, or I should say the Forsaken, being at a much closer proximity to the Sunwell, could there be a lasting effect there? I could speculate there being some sort of long, epic quest line that allows a select few of the Forsaken to somehow find a way to harness the arcane and holy powers of the Sunwell to alter their bodies. Maybe from this a new sort of Forsaken is created, a true sub-race of them who have bodies similar to Nathanos Blightcaller. Could we see a new Forsaken Paladin? It's what some have been asking for a long time, and this could be an opportunity if you really stretch the lore. But if not the areas surrounding Silvermoon, let's head back over to Kalimdor where a few more settlement options await. The Forsaken ran to Orgrimmar as refugees once before, and it wouldn't take much for Sylvanas to convince the War Chief to let them in because, she's the War Chief. There's not a lot of space though, at least not on the surface. It might be a stretch to shut down Ragefire Chasm as a dungeon, for the sake of creating a Forsaken living space, but there is a lot of it under Orgrimmar that could be occupied. Like I said earlier, there aren't a lot of natural places for the undead to stay. They're undead, and that tends to clash with the environment. But they are hardy, they're able to create settlements and adapt to the environment. This gives them a chance to occupy nearby places like Fellwood or Ashenvale, giving them plenty of access to resources and fun animals to experiment on. Or they can settle in Desolus, Stone Talon, or any zone they wished, because in a way, the awkwardness of it would feel similar no matter what. Like the Night Elves, if the Forsaken were to relocate anywhere on the Broken Isles, the most likely bastion for them would be Suramar. The outskirts of the city aren't very widely used by the Nightborn, and they just have to deal with maybe the Vrykul village to the east. And they're not far from one of the largest cities the Horde holds, or one of the largest cities ever. Access to the ley lines there could yield interesting stories in the Forsaken's quest for survival. Or disaster. So those are some of the favorites I thought of, but I'd like to see you share your own ideas in a comment below. Don't hold back like I did. I want to hear about some of the crazier ideas that you think could be the next chapter for the Night Elves and the Undead Forsaken. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, support the channel by liking it and subscribing for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.